Sacagawea. Introduction. In the first decade of the 1800s, a Native American teenage girl of Shoshone heritage went on one of the most famous trips in American history. As the only female in the group, she faced isolation. She also faced hunger, illness, severe weather, and challenging terrain, all with an infant to care for. This girl was Sacagawea, one of the most famous and revered Native Americans in U.S. history. Sacagawea's name. Sacagawea's name is written with two different spelling, including Sacagawea, Sacagawea, and Sacagawea. Her name is also pronounced in different ways. Although Sacagawea is common, her husband claimed that her name meant bird woman. Growth of the United States. During Sacagawea's lifetime, the United States was a very different place than it is today. In 1803, the United States acquired the Louisiana Territory from France. This huge area of land, 823,000 square miles west of the Mississippi River, doubled the country's size. Many different tribes of Native Americans had been living in that area for thousands of years. President Thomas Jefferson sent a team of explorers to the area, led by U.S. Army Captain Meriwether Lewis and Second Lieutenant William Clark. Jefferson instructed them to search for the Northwest Passage, a waterway believed to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Their job also included learning about the newly acquired lands. Lewis and Clark's troops, called the Corps of Discovery, began their trip on May 14, 1804, heading up the Missouri River from St. Louis by boat. Their path would cross Sacagawea's less than 6 months later. Sacagawea's roots. Sacagawea was born in 1788 or 1789 in what is now Idaho. The daughter of a Lemhi Shoshone chief, unlike other tribes in the area, her people had no firearms, so they were at the mercy of their enemies. Fearful of the Blackfoot and Hidatsa tribes, they had fled to the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. In the fall of 1800, when Sacagawea was about 12, she was captured by a group of Hidatsa in present-day Montana and taken to live with them. Sacagawea never expected to see her own people again. Within a few years, the Hidatsa sold her to Toussaint Charbonneau, a French-Canadian trapper, who made her his wife. They lived among the Mandan and Hidatsa in present-day North Dakota. Joining the Corps of Discovery. After traveling up the Missouri River for 6 months, Lewis and Clark reached the area where Sacagawea lived. In November 1804, the Corps of Discovery built a fort near the Mandan village. Over the winter, they learned everything they could about the lands to the west from the Mandan and Hidatsa. Lewis and Clark needed horses to cross the Rocky Mountains. They also needed interpreters to help them communicate with Native American tribes they would meet on their trip. Lewis and Clark heard about the Shoshones, Sacagawea's people, who owned many horses who lived at the base of the Rockies. Lewis and Clark hired Charbonneau and asked him to bring Sacagawea to serve as an interpreter. The arrangement was an amazing stroke of luck for both parties. Lewis and Clark were heading into an unknown region, and this girl knew both the area and the Shoshone language. For Sacagawea, this was an opportunity to return to her homeland. Sacagawea joined the expedition even though she was pregnant at the time. Before the start of the journey, with Lewis's help, Sacagawea gave birth to a son named Jean-Baptiste. During the trip, Clark developed a special fondness for the boy and called him Little Pomp, or Pompey. Pomp became the youngest member of the Corps of Discovery, and his mom the only female. The expedition left the Mandan village on April 7, 1805, after the spring thaw. 33 people, including Sacagawea and her baby, traveled in 2 piroguas, large rowboats with sails, and 6 canoes. They set out for an unknown land. On May 14th, Charbonneau was steering one of the piroguas when a huge wind caused him to lose control. The piragua tipped, and the expedition's most valuable items, including journals, navigational instruments, and medicines, started to float away. Losing those items would have meant disaster for the group. With Pomp on her back, Sacagawea reached down an arm and rescued almost all the items before the current carried them away. The Indian woman, to whom I ascribe equal fortitude and resolution with any person on board at the time of the accident, caught and preserved most of the light articles which were washed overboard, wrote Lewis in his journal. Sacagawea was also helpful to the expedition in other ways. She found edible plants that added important nutrients to their diet of deer and buffalo meat. Lewis was less impressed with Charbonneau, whom he dismissed as a man of no particular merit. West to the Pacific. As the expedition approached the Rockies, Sacagawea recognized the area where she'd been kidnapped. The Shoshone wouldn't be far away. Lewis and 3 others went ahead to meet them, while Clark and the rest of the group caught up a few days later. Lewis was welcomed into the Shoshone village as a guest of the chief Kawamate. While Sacagawea was interpreting for Lewis and Clark during negotiations with the chief for horses, she suddenly hugged Kawamate and cried. She had recognized him as her brother. During the meeting, Kamawate traded 29 horses for tobacco, knives, beads, and clothing. The expedition left the Shoshone village on September 1st, 1805. Sacagawea left her people to travel with the Corps to the Pacific Ocean. Crossing the rugged Rocky Mountains was by far the hardest part of the trip. They had no trail and struggled with snow, getting lost, and finding enough to eat. As they navigated one mountain range after another, they realized that there was no Northwest Passage connecting North America's waterways from east to west. The expedition was in the mountains for 3 weeks before they could see to the other side. Planning to again travel by water, they needed canoes as well as food. Sacagawea's people had told them about another group of Native Americans, the Nez Perce, who lived just west of the Rockies and would be able to help them. The Nez Perce fed the group, helped them build canoes, and gave them directions. The Corps reached the mouth of the Columbia River on November 7, 1805. Here the river rose and fell with the tides and began to taste salty, so they knew that the Pacific Ocean was close. Although relieved, they were facing terrible weather and needed a place to spend the winter. Lewis and Clark took a vote about where to build a fort. Everyone was allowed to vote, including Sacagawea and York, Clark's black slave. Sacagawea recommended staying in an area that had wapantu roots, which could provide a food supply. Lewis and Clark took her suggestion and built Fort Clatsop there, which is near present-day Astoria, Oregon. The Rockies would be too snowy and harsh for travel until spring, so they spent the winter making maps and notes of the area. The return trip. After winter ended, the expedition left Fort Clatsop and began the return trip up the Columbia River. On the way, they bought horses from the Nez Perce for crossing the Rockies. At one point, Lewis and Clark separated with Sacagawea, Pomp, and Charbonneau accompanying Clark's group by land. On their way to the Yellowstone River, back in Shoshone lands, Clark accepted Sacagawea's suggestion of which route to take. The Indian woman, who has been of great service to me as a pilot through this country, recommends a gap in the mountain more south, which I shall cross, Clark wrote. After reuniting with Lewis's party, the expedition traveled to the Mandan village. Lewis and Clark parted ways with Sacagawea at the Mandan village on August 17, 1806. Clark offered to take Pomp back with him to St. Louis and arrange for him to get an education. Sacagawea said he was too young, but that he could go in a year. After leaving, Clark wrote a letter to Charbonneau thanking him for Sacagawea's service. For such a long and dangerous journey, Clark wrote, she deserved a greater reward than they could offer her when they parted. after the expedition. Lewis and Clark were heroes back in Washington, D.C. Congress gave each member of the party extra pay as well as land. When Charbonnet heard about the rewards, he took Sacagawea and Pomp, now 4, to St. Louis where Clark lived. In the fall of 1809, Pomp stayed in St. Louis with Clark, while Charbonnet and Sacagawea left after 2 years to join another expedition in present-day South Dakota. Sacagawea gave birth to a daughter, Lizette, in August 1812. 4 months later, at about age 25, Sacagawea died of a fever. The following summer, the fort's clerk, John Luding, took Lizette to join Clark and Pomp in St. Louis. Clark became the legal guardian of both children. Sacagawea remembered. We don't know much about Sacagawea, but we do know that she traveled thousands of miles and survived extreme conditions as part of the Lewis and Clark expedition. She found food, served as an interpreter, and reassured the people they encountered that the expedition had peaceful intentions. Sacagawea's life has been the subject of myths that exaggerate her contributions, yet her real contributions were impressive enough. She came from the humblest of beginnings as a female Native American in the 1700s who was kidnapped and sold. She showed sufficient character and courage in difficult circumstances to prompt 2 famous explorers to write about her. The fact that we continue to tell her story and create art to honor her is evidence of her contributions. Sacagawea left a lasting mark on American history.